And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Welcome to The Politics, Prepping, and Paranormal Podcast.
Flippity-jibbity nonsense.
I thought it was terrific.
Not just big, it's yeah.
Let's go.
Welcome and thanks for listening to The Politics, Prepping, and Paranormal Podcast and my 25th episode. My name is Jeff Morey and I'm your host. I want to first say I'm super grateful to all of you that listen to my show and support me. 25 episodes is just the beginning. I have some new things in the works, so stick with me. It only gets better from here. This week I have another great interview lined up. I'll be welcoming former FBI agent and author Thomas Baker to the show. Thomas worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation for over 33 years as an investigator and manager. Thomas was the assistant special agent in charge of the Washington office during President Reagan's attempted assassination, and has also worked abroad as well. Few know the FBI like Tom does, and he has a unique insight and perspective into its inner workings. Tom is the author of the book, The Fall of the FBI, and I'm excited to talk to him. But before I welcome Tom to the show, first let's talk about what's going on in the news this week. Another week, more tariff war drama. As President Trump continues to play chicken with our biggest rival, China, China has announced another hike in retaliatory tariffs, raising taxes on some U.S. imports up to 125% on Friday. This comes after the Trump administration said on Thursday that U.S. tariffs on China are actually set at 145%, based on previous fentanyl-related levies. China continues to be the one country to remain defiant and unwilling to negotiate, as many other world countries have expressed the desire to negotiate, and some even saying they would be willing to eliminate tariffs completely if the U.S. would agree to do the same. Regardless of what much of the mainstream media has been telling you, the stock market actually rebounded nicely this week, with the Dow Jones Industrial crossing 40,000, and even liberal news outlets like CNN reporting that inflation fell 2.4% for the month of March. I've said it before, I think President Trump needs to stand firm on his trade policies and stop flip-flopping on tariffs, with the only exception being other countries willing to drop theirs in return. But have faith and have patience. A little pain and suffering in the markets now will pay dividends in the future. Speaking of trading, anyone hear the chatter about the spike in the NASDAQ call volume a few minutes before the 90-day tariff pause was announced? For those of you not familiar with the situation, take a few minutes and Google the net worth of some of your elected representatives. I'm not going to go through a list of names. Just believe me, there are people on both sides of the aisle that have been doing this. But insider trading is real, people, and it needs to stop. Any elected official that is caught doing insider trading should be immediately removed from office and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. News broke this week about an ancient species of wolf called the dire wolf being brought back from extinction using genetic edits derived from a complete dire wolf genome, with the, I guess you would say, creation of two dire wolf pups, Romulus and Remus. The company, Colosso Biosciences, who brought the previously extinct wolves back to life, said in a statement, "From the beginning, our goal has been clear: to revolutionize history and be the first company to use CPI-SPR technology successfully in the de-extinction of previously lost species. By achieving this, we continue to push forward our broader mission on accepting humanity's duty to restore Earth to a healthier state." So how do you all feel about this? Well, I think it's very cool on one hand. On the other hand, I very much have my reservations and issues on whether mankind tries to play God. I've said the same thing about AI. We're doing things that we as a people and a civilization are not meant to do. Regardless of how I feel, people around the world are raising similar ethical concerns, and it's sparking intense debate within the scientific community. I'd love to hear some comments on any of my social media accounts about all your thoughts regarding this. I'm sure a lot of my audience has heard by now about the discovery under the Egyptian pyramids. Using synthetic aperture radar Doppler topography, or SAR, researchers have found 8 vertical cylinder shaped structures aligned perfectly and 2 extended almost half a mile below the pyramid. And below that, they found evidence of even more structures and tunnels that go down almost a mile. Some of the scans have picked up some kind of coils or something that wrap around them that could be tunnels. Or if we really want to go down a rabbit hole, could they even be some sort of a power system? The theories are running wild, and scientists are trying to diminish and cast doubt on the findings, with some, such as Egyptian archaeologist Dr. Zahi Hawass, saying the findings are completely wrong and lack any scientific basis. Man, oh man, I can't wait to see what else comes out of this story. This kind of thing fascinates me, and the conspiracy theorist in me is like a kid in a candy store right now. I will definitely be keeping up with this one, and will let you know if I hear anything interesting in some of my conspiracy circles. Did anyone see the video from the helicopter crash in New York this week? On Thursday afternoon, a tourist helicopter crashed into the Hudson River after literally breaking apart midair. The Bell 206 sightseeing helicopter departed downtown Manhattan around 3 p.m. on Thursday, before breaking apart only 20 minutes into the flight. Videos are circulating the internet of the crash that show the fuselage separating in midair and the tail rotor crashing into the Hudson separately, killing 5 people and the pilot. With absolutely all due respect to the victims in the crash, without a doubt, our prayers go out to them. Why does it always seem like there is some kind of VIP significant to politics, economics, finance, or some other important aspect of world matters involved in these crashes? Agustin Escobar, the chief executive for rail infrastructure for the German technology company Siemens, and all his family were aboard. I see these crashes and reports, and it just raises more questions for me every time. In respect for the pilot and the Escobar family, I'll leave it at that for the time being. Our prayers go out to all the families of the victims. Okay, last story of the week. A federal judge has ruled that Columbia University student activist Mahmoud Khalil can indeed be deported. Khalil, who had organized and led student protests against the war in Gaza and who has suspected ties to Hamas, has been entrenched in a legal battle with the Trump administration for weeks now, and one of the first to be arrested in a recent crackdown on foreign students thought to be engaged in supporting terrorism and anti Semitism. Khalil's attorneys will, of course, appeal the decision, and Khalil will be allowed to remain in the U.S. until April 23rd. All right, that's what's going on in the news this week. At this time, I would like to welcome my guest, Thomas Baker, to the show. Welcome, Tom, and thanks for coming on and talking with me.
Great to be with you, Jeff.
First of all, man, you've had a long and storied career. I mentioned briefly at the beginning of the show a little about your career. Could you give us a little more information about your long and distinguished career serving our great nation in the FBI?
Well, as you know, I was in the FBI for 33 years. And after retirement, I continued to consult with the FBI for about 20 years, particularly in West Virginia at the CJIS, the Criminal Justice Information Services Division. I make some reference to that in my book. And what I did there was, well, what they do there is provide services for law enforcement throughout the United States. The fingerprint services are the most well-known, and they also have several others there. I became, I really enjoyed my career. And as you know, I had a wide ranging career, but I became very concerned the way things were evolving under Mueller and then under Comey. And I was quite close to it, being a consultant to the Bureau and also serving on a number of boards with other Bureau officials. And I puzzled about it. And as you can see, the main intent in my book was to try and figure out really what went wrong and how things got off course.
Absolutely. I've got to admit, besides being a fighter pilot, which was always my childhood dream, second was probably for me was being an FBI agent. What first got you interested in being in the FBI, and what age?
At a very young age, my paternal grandfather was a policeman in the city of Brooklyn when it was, excuse me, my maternal grandfather was a policeman in the city of Brooklyn when it was his own city. And his two sons, my uncles, were both policemen in New York City and also in the military police and with the railroad police. And growing up as a very small lad, I'd hear their stories, their adventures. So I was always interested in law enforcement. I had a very idealized view of law enforcement. Like them, I wanted to, put away the bad guys and save the good people. Later on, I realized things aren't really all that clear cut, and I devote some of the book to those dilemmas. But I always wanted to go into law enforcement, and just by happenstance, as I was finishing college, I ran into somebody, and I explained that, who directed me, who said, "Hey, you got a college degree, you can go into the FBI." And I had thought until that moment, as many of the public do, that everybody in the FBI had a law degree. That's not quite the case. All the special agents, that is. So I applied for the FBI, and I eventually became an FBI special agent.
Fantastic. Could you tell listeners, for the 98% of us, 99.5, I'd say, that never get to be in the FBI, can you just give us a little rundown of what a normal day would look like in the life of an FBI agent?
Well, it might sound trite to say, but there really isn't a normal day. But for an agent in the field, and especially in the years when I was working, when our focus was on federal criminal investigations, often in cooperation with the state and local police, a normal day would be we'd be working routine cases, and I say routine cases, fugitives, wanted people, background inquiries. And then there were the major cases that the FBI had a particular interest in. Bank robberies was the most common, but also we had kidnappings, extortions, airline hijackings eventually. And then, of course, one I write about in the book, which is very unique, presidential assassination. So you'd be working routine matters, and then you'd be called to help a more senior agent who was in charge of the scene of a bank robbery, and then, of course, kidnappings. And I relate one kidnapping in some detail in the book. Barbara Jean Mackle, a young woman who was kidnapped in Georgia. Her parents were located in Miami, Florida. I worked on that case along with many others quite extensively. So I made that a chapter in the book because it's quite a moving case and there's a lot of lessons to be learned from it. Barbara Jean Mackle was the woman you might recall or have heard about it. There's been a movie made about it. She was buried alive. The kidnappers buried her, and the two kidnappers, a man and a woman, they fled around Florida in a boat. There was quite a chase and a pursuit. Eventually, luckily, we were able to rescue the young woman and dig her up. She was buried on the earth for 80 hours, but she survived. It's a fascinating story.
So I've heard about that.
Yeah, I focused on that case. Then I focused on in the book on one airline hijacking case, which the federal law is called air piracy. And this was actually, believe it or not, the first case of kidnapping for airline hijacking for ransom. Until that case had happened, it happened at Dulles Airport near Washington, D.C. Until that time, all the airline hijackings had actually been done by people, ideologues or mentally affected people who wanted to defect to Cuba, take an airline to Cuba, and it almost became a joke. But then we were faced with this first, it was a TWA plane that was hijacked by a man in the Washington, D.C. area. It was where it happened. The flight originated in Phoenix. And that's a story with a lot of lessons. It ended in a bit of gunfire, was rather exciting. Adrenaline was pumping all the time, as you can imagine. But once again, there were a lot of lessons learned in that case. As a result of that case and some of the snafu, so to speak, that happened, memorandums of understanding were worked out between the FBI and the FAA and the various major air carriers. And there was a lot of joint training done, and it became much more professional in the way we approached aircraft hijackings. And there were more of them over the decades, as you know.
Wow. So you kind of pioneered some of this stuff that, is kind of normal these days.
Yeah. What I tried to do in picking out the case, well, first of all, I was motivated to write the book, The Fall of the FBI, because of the problems that have come to light in the last half dozen years or so. But as I started working on it, I didn't want to be all negative, and I developed a theme and organization to the book, which I called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, because I wanted to tell the good stories as well. So it's in three parts, the book. The good, which is these adventures and some of these cases I mentioned to you. And what I wanted to do, most of them are cases that are known to most of the general public, including the attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan. But I wanted to supply a few facts, a few details that are not widely known. And I think I did that. The second part, the good, the bad is injustice, some injustice that I've seen in the FBI and in my continued association with the criminal justice system. As I said to you at the outset, I was like most people. I went into law enforcement with a very idealistic view of things. I turned, as the years went by, I never became cynical, but I became aware that justice is often uneven. To say it very simply and oversimply, perhaps, there are people in prison today who probably shouldn't be there. And there are other people free as birds who probably should be in prison. That's an oversimplification, but that's the reality of the imperfect human society we live in. And then the third part of the book, of the good, the bad, and the ugly, is the ugly, what happened in the last several years and how it got that way, and my explanation from my own recollections in talking to people, but also from research, why, when, and where I think the corner was turned.
Real quick, and then I'm gonna ask you about a little bit more about the corner being turned. You mentioned that you were part of the assassination attempt on President Reagan. You were the assistant special agent in charge. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and maybe walk us through the events of that day?
Yes, that was a rather moving day and a kind of day, and everybody was alive then and heard about it. It's one of these things, even people just heard about it on the news or the television. They never forget it, and they remember where they were at that moment. I happened to be, I was the assistant agent in charge of the criminal division of the Washington field office of the FBI. At the moment the shooting, the attack on the president happened, I happened to be in my car, and I heard it on the commercial radio. And the reason I heard it on the commercial radio was it turned out that as President Reagan was exiting the Washington Hilton Hotel, he was surrounded by members of the media. So it was instantly reported live on the news radio and everything else like that. So I proceeded to the hotel. It turned out it was only about 4 or 5 minutes north of my location at that moment. And one thing that was on my mind, we had all in our training and in our own personal reading, but particularly in our training, we had all heard about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, who was murdered by an assassin in Dallas, Texas. And quite frankly, we all learned, and the public all knows it today, there's been so much written about it, that the reaction to that and the investigation of that was somewhat of a disgrace, a law enforcement disgrace. At the scene in Dallas, the Dallas Police, the Dallas Sheriff's Office, the Secret Service, the FBI, everybody, Texas Rangers, everybody was fighting with each other. Nobody was sure who was in charge. It was handled very unprofessionally. And as a consequence of it being handled unprofessionally, the situation developed where the assassin, Oswald, was able to be shot and killed right in the police station by this fellow, Jack Ruby. Which, of course, in turn led to many conspiracy theories about who really shot President Kennedy and what really happened. And we're living with some of that right to this day. But within law enforcement, certainly within the FBI and certainly within the Secret Service, there was a lot of inward looking over the years of what we did wrong, how to work better together. And in fact, the whole nation looked at it because the Congress, just a few years after Kennedy's murder, they passed a law making it a federal crime to assault, much less kill, but any assault on the president. They made it a federal crime, and they gave responsibility for that investigation to the FBI. So as I'm proceeding to the scene, I'm remembering all this turf war and fighting with others that went on, and I really wanted to avoid it. But I knew the statute, we had trained to it, and I knew the FBI was supposed to be in charge of this investigation. And I was very concerned about how I'd be received. Well, my concerns were misplaced because I arrived at the scene, and it turned out I was the first FBI agent on the scene, which I just somehow didn't expect, because in the past, from time to time when I'd be out, if there was a bank robbery, I'd go initially to the scene of the bank robbery, basically to show my face and encourage the agents who were working it. And there'd always be, by the time I got there, half a dozen agents there working with the Washington Metropolitan Police at the bank robbery scene. In this case, I arrived in front of the Washington Hilton, and I was the first FBI agent there. Well, what happened? First person comes up to me is a man from the Washington Metropolitan Police Department who I happen to know. He was in charge of the homicide division, and he already had in a glassine envelope, he was clutching it, the revolver that his officers had just taken off the would-be assassin, the shooter, John Hinckley, and he was ready to hand it to me. And I told him, hold on, there's going to be a laboratory truck here soon. Give it right to the lab. The next person who walked up to me immediately was a man by the name of Powers, who happened to be, and I also knew him, he was the agent in charge of the Secret Service field office in Washington. And his opening words to me were, "You're the FBI, you're in charge here now." That's the opening words from the Secret Service. There was no fighting, there was no argument. Everybody got along perfectly. Everybody was very professional. And in the years since then, talking to some of these individuals, I realized we all had the same thing in our back of our minds. The president's been shot. This is a historic case. We have to handle it right. We have to handle it professionally. Everybody had that commitment, and that's what we did.
Wow. Yeah, I don't think you see a whole lot of that anymore these days. You talked briefly about it, but without giving away too much from the book, is there a certain director or a certain time that you really first started to notice the fall of the FBI? Can you narrow that down to any specific time frame, or I don't know if you're allowed to talk about it, but
Well, no, very specifically, I'll tell you exactly when and what had happened and the moment I trace it back to. It was an unintended consequence of the September 11th attacks. As you probably recall or read about, September 11th attacks happened on a Tuesday, September 11, 2001. Robert Mueller had only become the director of the FBI 5 days before that. He was summoned to the presidential retreat in Camp David, Maryland, in the hills of Maryland, on Saturday morning following the attack. He believed to give a report on what the FBI had done. So essentially, there was about 3.5 days elapsed between the attack on Tuesday and the meeting on Saturday morning. Now, he's told me and others this many times, and others who were there have written about it in their books. What happened was he stands up to give his report to President George W. Bush in this cabin at Camp David, sitting beside President George W. Bush's Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor, and there are other top administration officials around the table, around the cabin. Bob Mueller gives his report of the FBI investigation, and the FBI had done what it does best, investigate. And in those 3.5 days, they had identified all 19 hijackers. They had identified their money flows, their credit cards, their rental cars, their travel pattern, their associations going back to Al-Qaeda, all their connections in this country. So there you have it. He laid out this whole thing, and he was very proud of it, that this whole investigation was handled so promptly and so thoroughly. And as he was finished speaking, President George W. Bush said to him, "I don't care about that. I just want to know how you're going to prevent the next one." Well, Mueller was kind of surprised by that reaction. And then not a minute later, but later that same morning, George Tenet, who at that time was the director of the CIA, stood up and gave a report, and he laid out for the president a plan going forward, what the CIA was going to do. And when he finished, George W. Bush said, "That's great." And he turned and looked at Mueller and he said, "That's what I want to hear." Mueller walked out of that meeting bound and determined to change the FBI from a law enforcement agency to an intelligence agency. And he used the term culture. He wanted to change the culture of the FBI, and he wanted to make it, in his words, an intelligence-driven organization. Now, some people could say maybe they saw reason for it at that time in history. Nonetheless, it had unintended consequences, because there's quite a difference between law enforcement and intelligence. In a law enforcement organization, people live, whether you're in the state police, the city police, the sheriff's office, whatever, you exist consciously or unconsciously every day, everything you do, for when that day comes, when you're going to have to stand up in court and raise your right hand and swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to a set of facts. That's quite different than an intelligence agency, which lives every day and deals in deceit and deception. And at the end of the day, their product is what they call an intelligence estimate, which really is a best guess. So that's where we're at. When you change that mentality, there's a lot of unintended consequences that follow. And Mueller also made a lot of specific changes to implement this, which had bad consequences. And we saw it later in the Hillary Clinton email investigation and in the Russian collusion investigation. That all had its origins under Mueller and then his handpicked successor, James Comey.
That's fascinating stuff. That leads me up to my next question. And today, how do you feel about new FBI Director Kash Patel?
Well, I hope for the best for Kash Patel. We needed a dramatic change. We know already that he's changed some of the investigative priorities. He's certainly putting an emphasis back on law enforcement, back on being cops, addressing violent crime throughout the nation. I don't know I have never met him. I know several of the people who are close to him who are advising him, and I hope for the best.
That's all you can do, I guess, at this point. I've listened to Dan Bongino's show quite a bit in the past. I've enjoyed his show. How do you feel about him as the appointment for deputy director? That got a lot of media coverage negatively about that, unfortunately.
Yes, but he gave a message just yesterday to an email message to all FBI employees, assuring them that he's going to be non-political and balanced. That's probably an appropriate message. And the same with him. I just hope for the best for him. And there's a lot to be done. And they're already doing some good.
Great. Glad to hear it from somebody that knows the inner workings. Okay. I'm going to ask you a very controversial question here. With all the talk about the so-called insurrection on January 6th, do you believe that the FBI had plants in the crowd on that fateful day, as so many people, including Representative Clay Higgins of Louisiana, have suggested?
I don't know. This is for a fact. I don't know. But when you have many different groups were involved that day, and as you know, essentially what happened that day, there were 2 or 3 small groups of maybe a dozen each. You heard the names, the Proud Boys and others, who tended towards violence. And then there was thousands, 2 or 3,000 people who actually entered the Capitol, and maybe 10 or 20,000 at the rally beforehand, who were just citizens who were rather upset about things. So there's a variety of people there in a variety of groups. It's as likely as not, when you have that many people there, that there probably were one or more people in some of those groups who were FBI informants or had some past association with the FBI. But the specificities of that, I don't know. But if there were some there, it's not all that surprising.
Interesting. All right. A little bit of a nerd question here. I'm sure you've heard about the TV series that had cult following, the X-Files, that followed 2 FBI special agents as they investigated the paranormal for the FBI. Is there any kind of special section of the FBI today that investigates any kind of strange phenomenon like that, or any that you could talk about at least?
Well, Jeff, I'm glad you asked that. I know this is a particular interest of yours, I realize. and it's funny. I've never really been asked much about that here in this country, but as you know, I was assigned overseas in Australia and then in France for a number of years at American embassies. And it's unbelievable that this show about those 2 male and female agent team. What was the name of the show?
Mulder and Scully.
Yeah.
David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson,
Yes.
I think was her name. Yeah, those were the stars. I love that show. I used to watch it.
What's the name of the show?
The X-Files. It's called The
The
X-Files.
X-Files.
It had a cult following, like back in, I
Well,
would say, the
beyond
90s.
in Europe, it has been for decades now phenomenally popular, and it's rerun in Europe all the time. And when I was living and working in France, particularly, I had numerous people come up, and they didn't ask me if the FBI had such a unit or a team. They had totally bought into it, and they wanted me to tell them about it. And I said, I never heard of it. I don't know anything about it. I only heard about this show. And so it's a very widespread show, very popular around the world, and not only in the English-speaking world, like Australia and Canada, but it's also, I guess, with subtitles or something. It's in mainland Europe and France. I know it was on all the time, and many people saw it and took an interest in it. But I'll tell you what I told them. I don't believe there is such a unit. I never heard of such a unit, and I don't know anything about such a unit.
Fair enough. I was just curious to see what somebody with inner
Yeah.
workings would know about it. So, okay, Tom, I'm gonna be honest here. I came across your profile online, and that's how we first linked up. I readily admit I'm not much of a book reader, but I remember I was working on notes for this show. I was laying in bed with my wife, and I told her, I said, "Man, I am really interested in this book," and I mean that. This is just a fascinating subject matter to me, especially coming from someone who has such an intimate knowledge of the Bureau's inner workings. Without giving too much away, because I definitely want everyone to go and get this book. Can you tell us a little more about the book? I know you've already broke down the good, the bad, and the ugly. Is there anything else you can talk about and tell the listeners about?
Well, okay, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And of course, in response to the ugly, I have some ideas of some things that might change to turn the culture around, to get back to law enforcement training. One of the things I mentioned, and I almost harp on it, is the Constitution. When we were in new agents training and throughout our career, there was always in the past in the FBI an emphasis on the Constitution, and to put it simply, not violating people's rights. We were taught about the whole Constitution, but particularly the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. And then, of course, you you have these amendments that some people see as a challenge to law enforcement, the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment, which has to do fourth with searches and seizures, and then the right to counsel and the right protection against self-incrimination. And we had an instructor, and I remember this so well, and he said to us that we shouldn't think of the Constitution or the Bill of Rights as a challenge. We should embrace it. And we were taught about those amendments particularly, and we were issued a pocket-sized copy of the Constitution. And I remember the instructor saying, to keep it in your breast pocket. And when you're sitting in somebody's home interviewing an American, a citizen, or when you're searching somebody's home, if you have the Constitution with you, it will be very hard for you to go off track. It would be very hard for you to violate that person's rights. And that's how we were taught. And of course, to embrace the whole Constitution. And for a long time, it was one of the FBI mission priorities to protect people's constitutional rights, particularly the First Amendment, which encompasses the right to free speech. That's the biggie. Right. And the right to freedom of religion, the right to freedom of assembly, the right to freedom of the press. And we were always cautioned about that. I think that's something that's been lacking. That has to be addressed in changing the culture. The other thing that has happened, in addition to the cultural change, is the top heaviness. And this began with Mueller. When Mueller took over the FBI, there were 10 headquarters divisions, each headed by an assistant director. Now there are, believe it or not, 40 headquarters divisions. Some of them are called directorates, headed by an assistant director. And then these have been grouped into a half dozen, they call them branches, and they put an executive assistant director over that. So you have another level of management between the director and the working people. It's too terribly top heavy. That's something that I hope Bongino and Kash Patel will address to cut down on some of that heavy overhead, some of that bloat. There are indications that that is what they're doing, and I hope they continue to do it. Now, some of that is not unique to the FBI. The cultural change is, but the bloat is not. I think in any bureaucracy, and I'd go so far as to say even in the corporate world, there's sometimes just this natural growth of the bureaucracy, and that has to be checked and kept in check. And I think now you see this fellow, Musk and others, looking at it in the other federal agencies, how much they've grown too. So that's something that has to be addressed.
Absolutely. From what I can decipher, this is a pretty incredible tell-all book that's going to give us a very deep, dark look into the FBI. Are you at all concerned about at best being censored and at worst, well, I'm not going to speculate on that, but is this something that's ever on your mind or something you think about? I know you're retired now, but.
Well, yes and no. I would say amongst the people I meet in the Bureau today still, and in the among the former agents, most people are very supportive of what I have done. And of course, I ran some of the chapters by some individuals just for the sake of fact checking. And I got pretty good feedback. But there are a cadre of people who are loyal to McCabe and Comey and Strzok, and they don't like that I did this. I never felt threatened, actually, which is what your question is. But others in my family and friends have been concerned about this, which just indicates that the situation we are in this country at this point. But I'm glad I did it. I'm very satisfied that I wrote it. And I stand by it. And I did do a lot of fact checking, and I ran a lot of things by other people, and I'm quite confident in the book.
Great stuff. It takes good people like you to come out and talk about these kind of things. You don't talk about this stuff and kind of expose it and get it out in the mainstream, then nothing's ever going to change. So excellent. I usually like to end most of my interviews by asking guests a little about their personal lives so that listeners can get to know them and connect with them. Could you tell us about your life now, being retired from the FBI?
Okay. Well, I retired over 20 years ago, but as I said to you, I continue to work very closely with the FBI through my associations and my consulting work. And that sort of wound down about 2 or 3 years ago. And I've spent the last 2 or 3 years actually doing a lot of writing and research. Prior to writing this book and since writing the book, I've written perhaps as many as 20 op-eds for the Wall Street Journal and occasionally for other publications like The Federalist or The Spectator. And I've kept myself busy doing that, and I enjoy that. And one side benefit, you asked for personal note, some of this writing has put me back in touch with people that I hadn't been in touch with in many years. And that's been rewarding and been a very positive experience. Part of that, I went out to my wife with me, and as you see, I mentioned her several times in the book. She's been my partner through a lot of this. Typical of many writers, she's my first editor, and she and I went together to President Ronald Reagan's museum and library in California, and sat down and did some interviews with those people concerning particularly the attempted assassination chapter in the book. So that's what I've been doing for these last several years. And as I say, Ann's my key partner, and I'm blessed that I still have her with me.
Fantastic. Well, Tom, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me. This is great stuff, and everybody needs to go out and get this book, The Fall of the FBI. This is absolutely fascinating subject matter, and like I said, you're going to get a firsthand perspective that you're just not going to see anywhere else. So, thank you again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff, for what you do. We need a lot of citizens like you, Jeff.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, that's my show for this week. Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Thomas Baker as much as I enjoyed talking to him. Tom's book, The Fall of the FBI, is available on Amazon as well as Barnes & Noble online, on Audible as well as ebook, either Kindle or Nook, and you can also buy it as a hardcover. I highly suggest picking it up. You won't find a better resource to get an insider's view of the FBI. So be sure to get your copy, and be sure to follow me as well on all my social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube, Blue Sky, or email me at dpppodcast@yahoo.com. Until next week.
Thank you for listening to the Politics, Prepping, and Paranormal Podcast. Your source for real news and analysis on politics, prepping, paranormal, conspiracy theories, and the volatile state of the world we live in. Tune in next week and every week for a new episode, and stay safe, stay healthy, and stay vigilant.